Yeah, that's what I do. That's my job. Today, we're doing a very like fundamental beginner overview of UI because UI in Unity is complicated. So we're going to get started. I'm just, don't mind me reading chat. Okay. So Unity UI is a whole thing. What I mean by that is that you have your normal looking stuff, which is like that, like, oh, look, so normal. You've got, can I write on it? I can. You got, I can't write on it. What? Oh, laser pointer. You've got your hecking, like your transform that tells you where the object is in space, like 0, 0, 0. That means it's in the middle. And if you move it, if you move this value up, it goes that way and stuff. And you've got your sprite render that tells you what picture it is and what color it is, all that cool stuff. But then you go to UI and it's like, what is this? I've never seen this before. What does this mean? What is anchors? What is that? Why can't I change these values? And like why is there a scale, but it's also like a width and a height? Where how those like the same thing? What is this canvas render thing? What is this image thing? Like what am I looking at? So there's a whole separate system that's not the same thing as the normal UI when you're doing UI. It's like in a different space. The reason Unity does that is because when you're doing stuff with normal objects and stuff, it's a lot more difficult to like say know what your mouse is pointing at or know where the corner of the screen is, because all that stuff is dictated by a camera and not by an actual screen space. So there's a whole separate system, and understanding that system is, at least at a base level, is going to be really important for doing UI good. So today we're talking very basic concepts and stuff. So I will show you what all these things are. I won't name them specifically over the course of talking about this thing. We're going to be making a basic main menu scene. We're not going to be like scripting it or anything. It's just going to be setting up the objects in the right spot and having them be good and all nice and looking and stuff. So all these things will be in there. So if you haven't already, I've said this about 5 times, but here's your obligatory 6th time. You can download the package we're using right here. This will help you follow along and do the Unities goodly. Yes, okay. Cool. Does anyone have any problems or quandaries before I go into Unity right here in a second? Fun action. Where are you right now? Is that how I say your name? Cool. Double-clicking opens the hub, but it says it's an invalid project. Yeah, so you don't want to open the project directly in the hub. What you want to do is make a new project and then drag the package into the project. You can make a 2D project that will make it create it the fastest, and that might take like a good while, so might keep moving. It's closer to like a compressed version. Yeah, so basically it's like instead of dragging in many assets and scripts at once, like one at a time, you just drag in a whole package and it all goes in there. It's pretty cool. Alex figured out how to do it. Yep. Okay. Okay, cool. Are there any more issues? All right, cool. If not, I will jump directly into Unity time. I don't know why my Unity has gone back to the other window. I need to move it over. Oh, that's fun. Okay, I need to give my Unity a hot sec here. Okay, so this is about what you should be greeted with if you download the package. You should see a scene like this. It should say UI workshop.
It's also possible that it starts you in an empty scene. And if it does that, just double click on the scenes folder and go into the scene called UI workshop.
Yep, do that. So you should see basically all of these things here. So there should be a background, a game, a font, a railway regular SDF. This TTF file is not super important, but if that's there, you can keep it, and a rounded rectangle. That is what we'll need today to assemble our thing. Okay. Let me know if anything is weird. If not, I'll just jump into it. So the very first thing when you're doing with UI is you want us to sort of set up your environment. So the easiest way to do that is just to add something. So if you right click in the hierarchy, I'm here in the hierarchy section, you can go down to UI. And then over here, you can add any of these things. They'll all do what this for you. For now, I'm going to just add an image because I know that our menu is going to have a picture in it. It would have been nice if the package had a folder containing everything because right now it imports everything to the assets folder path. Yeah. I don't know if there was a way to set that up before, but yeah. Luckily, it's not a huge issue. It's not a huge issue because unless like I think I just put it. I think it's just the scene that's here. The text mesh pro folder is not very important. What is the difference between image and raw image? Raw image is for textures and image is for sprites. That's the basic breakdown. We're not going to worry about textures for this workshop. That's a whole nother thing. But you might use it in, say, if you're trying to render a video and you need to grab a texture for each frame. Okay. Cool. So we're going to add an image. Don't add a raw image. Add an image. Okay. So you'll notice that that didn't just create an image. It created a bunch of other things. So to briefly explain what these are, this is a canvas. So all of your UI elements are drawn on a canvas. Basically, it's a block of space that sort of maps to your screen. So notice it has a certain size by default. This size is like the size of your screen, like in pixels. So if I was to go to my game, right, and my screen was like this big, say it's like a phone or whatever, then the canvas will be that big, like that. Or if I was like on a really wide monitor like this, and it was this size, then it'll be like this big. So that canvas reflects how big your actual screen is. For now, I'm just gonna put it to just any scale, really. And you'll also notice that it spawns an object called an event system. This object is really important. It is what lets all of your things on your UI actually be clickable and pressable and stuff like that. So just keep that the way it is. No need to worry about that too much. As long as it's there, you're good. So now down to the actual image. This image has a few components on it, and we'll explain what those are here. So this is the transform component. This is how transforms look in UI. Basically, everything in UI is sort of like pinned to a spot on the screen and then moved relative to that pinned spot. So for the most part, you don't have to worry about most of these values on here. The anchor numbers, you can ignore those for the most part, since they'll be set somewhere else. The pivot is set in a different spot. You just need to worry about your position variables. Don't worry about your Z. And then your rotations and scales. So for the most part, you can position things by doing this. You can see the values changing up there in your position. If I scale this up, you can see the width changing and stuff like that. This width can go into the negatives. So if you just go back here, you'll see this X. That red X looks scary. It just means that your image is like flipped on the screen. So you just want to flip that back. If this ever happens, there's ways to overcome it. Okay. So this image is going to be basically the big thing on the screen that says game at the top. So what I'm going to do is go to source image under the image. This is basically the same as your sprite renderer, just on UI instead. And you can assign the source image to game right here. You can click this button on the side and then click game, or you can drag the game into it like that. I'll just demonstrate that actually. You can take game and drag it right here. So it makes that appear, this. and you can like scale that down. You might be like, okay, well, it's supposed to be this size, but it spawned in, it's like all square and not fun and stuff. Like maybe it spawned like that, and you want to get it to that so that it's the original size. You don't have to estimate that. So if you press this button called Set Native Size, that's going to basically make the image as big as it comes in, which will set the aspect ratio properly. Does anyone have any issues getting here? So we have an image on the screen, it says game, and
I think something we can probably mention is if you make a UI element but don't attach it to a canvas, it just won't appear. So it needs to be beneath a canvas.
I can move that up and you can see it's just not there. Yeah, so it's definitely got to be in the canvas. Yep.
Yeah, that's just a small thing.
Yeah. Okay, so this is great, right? We've got the word game here, and it's like that. It's like the middle of the screen. It's all cool and stuff, right? Well, that's only if your game looks like this. Some people might be playing on smaller screens, or might be playing on windowed mode, or might be playing on phones. And if you shrink the size of the game, you'll see that it like sort of goes off the screen. It cuts like this. And if you were to scale it down like this, it would like flow off the screen like that. That's not very fun. It's off the screen. What's happening there? So what's happening is that we haven't actually anchored the image properly. Right now, the image is basing its position off of the center of the screen. And the distance from the center of the screen to the top of the screen is not always the same. So what we need to do is get some anchors on this image so that it works properly. This is like the most confusing part for people unfamiliar with the UI. So this is worth knowing. So this is where all your anchoring stuff will happen. This is like the hub of anchoring world. Is anchor presets land. So you'll notice it's just a bunch of buttons here, so it looks very confusing. But basically, these are just margins. This area is the space you'll be working in. These buttons here, these 16. And each of these defines a specific way in which your object can be anchored to the screen, or is typically anchored to the screen. So for example, you could anchor your object to the top corner like this. That dot means you'll see the what is it called? The crosshair goes over here. That means that your game object, your image, will try to stay that distant, the same distance from this corner as you've specified right here. So if I scale the game window like this, you'll notice if I scale this side, the game stays there, right? That's because it's anchored to this corner. As long as that corner doesn't move, the actual image won't move. If I move this side, you'll see that it follows like this. If I move this, you'll see that it doesn't care. But if I move this, the top part, I can't move the top part. But if I was able to move the top part, you'd see that it would follow the top part. So those are these anchorings, but you might be wondering what these blue arrows mean. What are these? So these are stretch anchors. So with the normal anchors like this, it's all like hard-coded distance values. So the exact number of units between here and here will stay the same. But if you pick this, say I pick this one, right, this, then the image will start stretching. It's because it wants to stay, because this span here means that the image will take this bottom edge and this top edge and scale to the same distance here. So the distance between the bottom here and the bottom here will be the same always. And the distance between the top here and the top here will be the same always. And you get with this image, you get some pretty gnarly effects when that happens. So if I scale like this, you can see, oh, it grows. If I do this, it shrinks. So that's a result of trying to keep the same distance between the top and the bottom like this. So this distance is constant, it will stay that big. And this distance is constant, so it will stay that big. Wide game, yeah, exactly. So if I if I pick a different one, so there's also this one, which is scaling, which is stretching, but in all directions. So if I pick this is great for things that you want to span the whole screen. So, but like for now, it's like this distance is the same, that's the same, that's the same, that's the same. So it'll act that way on all axes. So I can stretch it on this side, I can stretch it on that side, and I can stretch it from the bottom as well. Are there any questions about that basic process, those basic anchors?
Seems good.
Okay. So a second thing worth noting about this menu, you'll notice at the top it says Shift also set pivot and Alt also set position. So if you were to hold Shift or Alt while clicking these, you'll notice that stuff changes in them. So to talk about what those mean, Shift sets the pivot position. So if I press the top left here, for example, and while I'm holding Shift, you'll notice that not the crosshair goes up here, but also there's this little circle on the game thing. That circle is the pivot, so that's this. And when I press that button to go to the top left, it snaps the pivot there also when you hold Shift. The pivot is important because it's the axis around which the object rotates. So if I grab the rotation like this, and that lagged out. Grab the rotation like this, when the pivot's in the middle, when I rotate the object, it'll rotate around the middle. But if I was to place the pivot on the top left, like by doing this, I pressed Alt on accident. But if I was to put the pivot on the top left by shift clicking this button, then now when I rotate, it rotates around that corner. And the pivot position always goes to the blue dot noted when you press shift. So if you hold shift like this, you can see on these stretch ones, the blue dot is a specific location, and that's where the pivot will go if you press that button. And then the second one is Alt. So Alt also sets the position of the object. So when you're holding Alt and you press, say, the top right one, then the object itself will snap to that corner like this. So you see how it immediately goes to that corner. That's what happens if you hold Alt and click. That's really useful if you want to get if your object is sort of in a wild position and you want to immediately get it there and like, give it a little bit of margin space like this. So you can just immediately get it close to the corner. And you can hold both, that will set the pivot as well. So right now last time I didn't set the pivot, so the pivot is still up there. But if I was to shift Alt click it, then the pivot would be set up there, so we can start rotating it. Why or how does the Z rotation affect the image? So in Unity, Z is the axis of rotation for 2D objects in 2D space. Since X rotation is, well, you can't see it well because it's in 2D, but if I went to 3D, right, real quick, this is in 3D. So if you did X rotation, it'd be this direction like that. And if you did a Y rotation, it'd be this like that. And the Z rotation is like this. But when we're in 2D, and when we're in UI, typically we don't want to use these rotations because they go into 3D space, make things complicated and stuff. So when we're in 2D, we only use Z for rotation. Yeah. You get used to that when you use 2D a lot. Z is the only number you need for rotation ever. Is anyone lost on that anchoring things? Okay, cool. So if we have anchoring down, that's like the big thing to know. That's like, if you take away one thing from this, it would probably be the anchoring. So now we need to talk about how to anchor this image properly, right? So we know we want it to be sort of on the top of the screen, like here, right? And we know we want it to sort of stay at the top, stay near the top of the screen, and we want it to stay in the middle. So the obvious choice for this is this one right here. So I'm going to set it to that and then move it down a little bit. There. We need standardization of axes, color, and names. Yeah, we do. Yeah. So that will make it so that your title game will always stay near the top of the screen. But what happens when it's like going off the screen like this, or it's going off the screen like that? Like, what should we do in those cases? Well, in this case, we want to actually shrink the object down so that it stays in the position. But how do we do that effectively? Well, to do that, we're going to introduce a concept called a panel. When you go into UI, you can choose to add an object called a panel. What a panel is essentially it's just an image that spans the whole thing, and it's a bounding box for your things, basically. So if I take a panel and I remove this image because we don't need it, right? Then what we have here is just a bounding box. This is a box. And we can put things inside the box and we can get them to sort of sit inside and do cool things like that. By default, when you add a panel, it will be in the stretch. It will be the full stretch anchor. Because typically when you add panels, you want them to sort of be inside your thing with a certain margin space. And so this is the perfect way to do that. But for our purposes, we know that we want the panel to be sort of close to the top. So we know it just shouldn't be this stretch one. But we don't want to discriminate anything left and right. Like it doesn't need to be close to the left, it doesn't need to be close to the right. So we can stretch it in those dimensions only. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift Alt click the full stretch, horizontal stretch anchor to the top. And again, the reason I picked that one is because we want the panel containing the game image to be at the top. But we don't want it to be any to the left or any to the right. We want it to sort of stay in the middle. So we stretch it all the way across. And now maybe we want our game panel to have some, well, I'll get to that in a minute, actually. Okay. So now our game panel, our game image is sort of inside this panel, and you can scale it to however big you want. But I'm going to do like this so it sort of contains the game image inside. Now what we can do is I can put the image underneath the panel so that this image is sort of based on the panel. So now these anchors will no longer try to go towards the large bit, the full canvas, but they will try to go within the panel space like this. So you'll see that if I anchor this at the bottom, the crosshair maps to the bottom of the panel instead of the bottom of the canvas. Yeah. So basically any object underneath a panel or anything really will treat that bounding box as the whole canvas for itself when anchoring. So if I wanted this game image to be at the bottom, then I could do that. But in our case, we want this game object to actually be in the middle of this panel because we positioned the panel such that the image goes in the center of it. So I'm going to Shift Alt select the center anchor like this. Dane asked, can you clear anchors? What are objects anchor settings when created? So anchors are always there. Your object will always have an anchor. There's no way to like clear it or have it do something different. Sort of the center line and the center stretch are like very neutral settings if you want to sort of go for that, but they will have activity where they're anchored to those spots. What are objects anchor settings when created? So if you make an image, you can see what the anchors are. It defaults to center like this. If you make a panel, it defaults to full stretch. So if I make a panel here, the default is full stretch like this. But I encourage you when you're doing your UI, you should always set the anchors for everything. Know what anchoring system all of your objects have, so that when you change your screen resolution and stuff, you know what it does. Does anyone else have any other questions about anchoring? Anchoring is a little hard, so I do want to hammer that in more than other things.
let's do an example where you use anchoring to make like a really basic menu thing.
Yeah, we'll do buttons in it. We'll do buttons in a sec. I'm gonna get this game image finished. Actually, no, we could do buttons now. Yeah, we could do that now. Okay, so the anchoring we did still isn't, but the anchoring we did still doesn't fix the issue with this. What the panel helps us do is it lets us use a component called, I guess we'll talk about this. It lets us use a component called the aspect ratio fitter. So what this does is it keeps the sort of object here to the same aspect ratio based on a setting. So if I add an aspect ratio fitter to the game image and then set the aspect mode to fit in parent, like that, then what this does, this stops us from doing any of this stuff to it. And it will maintain this aspect ratio while maximizing its size within the object it's in. And so the reason we did the panel was to position this object in the right spot. So now if I go to the game window, we can scale this and see that the game will always be the right size, and it will scale down accordingly when I get too small. For some reason, it doesn't do that. I think that's because it doesn't do this because I don't have the this part set here. This is a constant value, but for all the side for the purposes of all the side panels, this will work just fine. So that whole workflow, the whole workflow with the aspect ratio fitter is whenever you have an image and you want to stay a certain like you want it to scale up and down and stuff, you put it inside a panel. You position the panel where you want it to go, and then you set this to fit in parent, and it will always go there. That is just a life hack with those images. That's what you do. Okay, and then obviously another quality of life thing we could do is you notice how it's like really far against the edges. It's like really close. So what we might do is give this some margins. So if you take the panels and just scale this in like that, the image will now have some margin space to the edge, a little bit of margin space. Okay, so next up, we're going to talk about how to make the buttons, because you can't have a good proper menu without buttons. So I'm gonna move some of this panel out of the way a little bit, and we can put our buttons sort of in this spot right here. So luckily, Unity has good things with buttons. So you can have buttons like this. When you go to UI, you can pick button. You can pick button if you don't have TextMesh Pro imported, but I recommend using TextMesh Pro. If you know Ian from last year, he disagreed. So I'm going to add a button with TextMesh Pro. What that will do is that we'll create a button object with a TextMesh Pro object underneath it that has text on it. So I can change this text to say whatever it wants. For example, I can say play, right? Because we want to play the game. And I'm going to assign the font face to it, really regular, like that. So that will look like this when you have it all done. So now we might want to scale up the button. We might want to do this, and again, we'll do anchoring. So how should we anchor this button, you think? Well, the answer is it sort of depends how you want to actually have your buttons. So if you want to have your buttons be very long, like this, and sort of go all the way to the edge of the screen and stuff, if you want to have your button be very long like this and go all the way to the edge of the screen and stay long and be big, then you can pick your stretch, one of your horizontal stretch ones. so it stays the same distance from the sides. But if you want your buttons to sort of be in the middle, which is what I'm going to be doing, then the middle anchor works just fine. Cool. So now we can make some more buttons because play is not the only button you want on your menu. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this object and copy it a couple of times. So I'm going to take the first one, move it down here, and then take the second one and move it down here. Because I picked the middle anchor, these will all be offset certain distances from the center. So they will stay. That will have the effect of them staying the same distance apart from each other. Now I'm just going to write in some text here. So I say play with the options, and let's just say this button is the quit button. So that looks like this when you get in here, but you'll notice immediately that it does weird things. The distance from the game thing is not quite the same on all screen sizes. They sort of they'll do that kind of thing. We won't fix all those issues right now. But one thing we do want to address is the fact that like it's kind of hard. Like we have to eyeball how far apart these buttons are going to be. And like, what if we want to add another button? Like, do we want to squeeze that in there by manually adjusting the size of every button here just to get that in there nice and cozy? Luckily, there is a way to automatically position objects in a row like this, and that is with a layout group. So we're going to do one of those. And once again, this involves all of the buttons being inside a parent panel. So what we're going to do is make a panel object like this. This panel will be a bounding box for our buttons. So I'm going to remove the image like this, just so we can have a panel like this. And I'm just going to eyeball where it needs to go. Maybe it will bound all the buttons sort of like that. Now, as for anchors, maybe I want it to be approximately in the middle of the screen and to have the same size all the time, no matter what screen it's on. So I'm going to click the middle anchor like this. So you can verify that the buttons still act the same underneath this panel that's anchored to the center. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to add the layout group. So I have a bunch of buttons and I want them to be positioned one above the other in sort of like a list. And when I have that, this is a great time to use a layout group. The vertical layout group is what we want here because that will stack the objects vertically on each other like we want for the buttons. So I'm going to click the vertical layout group and add that here. You can also add horizontal ones for things that go across and grids for things that do both, although the grid one has some problems. So notice right away that the buttons sort of snap to the top left right away. We can sort of get rid of that by unticking these, or you could have the buttons, you could remove the buttons from the panel before you do anything. So if I add the vertical layout group like this, and then just uncheck everything before adding the buttons in like this. Yeah, there's a few ways to fix stuff up if it like changes how your objects underneath it actually look. We will hopefully remedy that though. So let's align everything to the upper center, or upper center or middle center both work. They're both fine, but you can pick one that you like. I do not want to do that. Okay. Cool. So generally, when you're looking at this, you can sort of just mess with the spacing values and see how that affects the objects and stuff like that. You can mess with the padding. You can see what those do, how those affect the location of your things. These buttons down here are a little confusing. It's not super clear what exactly they do. Generally, so you've got width buttons and height buttons here. In your vertical layout group, you can generally, I think you can ignore the width ones. You don't really want to use those too much, I think. I actually don't remember which way it was, but there's this, like, one of the sets you don't really need to worry about as much with vertical layout groups. So let's see. I'm trying to remember what buttons to press if I want to actually take the buttons and move them around, but I can't find them. So what we're gonna do instead is, so there's a couple ways you might want to do this. Maybe you want them to just sort of be evenly spaced and fill the whole panel like this. What you can do is click the child force expand on height, and that does that as you'd expect, like this. You can of course mess around with the values and get it the way you like. So for example, maybe I think it's like that. That looks right. But if you want them to sort of fill up the space so that they have the maximum, so that they take up all the space they can, then you just check all these buttons, they'll do that.
Okay, so what happens if you add a new button to that panel?
Yeah, so if I add a new button to the panel, it will automatically sort of do that scaling for you. So if you paste a new one, it'll do that, right like that. And that does that as well if you had the opposite way like this. I need to undo that after I've checked all those things. That's because the child force expand actually, like, a lot of these will change the size of your buttons, and when you uncheck them, it doesn't like undo those changes. So if you see a change that you're like, no, I didn't want that to happen, you can undo back to before that happened. To get everything back. You can't just uncheck the box. But yeah, the control child size height is what you'll probably want to use. But you'll probably want to use to get it to scale all the way up. You just don't want to have this checked while child force expand is not checked, because it will cause everything to shrink like this. So don't do that. Layout groups can be very confusing. I can't go into a super large amount of depth here about them yet. It's a whole thing. There are much more elaborate tutorials out there, but the basics of it is just you can change the values to do what you want. For vertical layout groups, use height, and for horizontal layout groups, use width. The basic idea, and use your child alignment, obviously. But yeah, so maybe I want the buttons to be all the way up like this, and I want them to be spaced a certain distance apart so they have nice padding. So I'll just do that, and that'll be my those will be my buttons. Does anyone have any problems with getting that to work?
What would you do if you wanted to change the order the buttons are on?
If I wanted to change the order, say I wanted to quit to go above options because I don't like the fact that you will quit last, you can just take your button and move it above the options button, and it will sort them. It didn't do that. That's what I thought it would do. Okay, so you could take these out and then just put them back in the opposite order. And that didn't work either. Wait, what? I swear that works.
It's working in my project. I don't know what's wrong with yours, Matt.
Yeah, mine is doing some weird things. Bye, Amy. Thanks for coming.
Is your vertical layout group turned off?
Oh, it is. Oh, fun. That might have been why I did that. There
Objects
we go.
tend to work if they're enabled.
Yeah. Thanks, Dane. I didn't see that. Whoops. I don't know why it was off. That's so weird. But yeah, you could just flip them around like this. Yeah, I could have sworn that would work. All right. Any more questions about that? All right. So one final, like, very important thing to know about this things. I won't properly anchor these buttons today, but one thing to notice is, say you're just like putting a bunch of stuff in, and this can happen if your UI is quite complicated, and your text is like this big. Say your text is like this on this button. So here, what I've done is I've just scaled up the text so that it occupies a bunch of space. This is something that typically happens on accident when you're not super careful about where your text is, or if your anchoring changes and it's not quite right. This will happen, and this can be really frustrating. So if I play the game here, you can see that for some reason when I press the play button, it thinks I'm clicking the options button instead. Right? And I click the options button and the options button presses, and I click the quit button, that's fine, but the play button is just weird. Why does it do that? If you ever have issues where your UI is not working quite right, there is a pretty good way to debug your things. Oh yeah, red for play mode, yeah. I do that because I like it to be really obvious when I'm in play mode. Yeah, so if your things aren't working, like let's just say like, oh, I accidentally did that and my buttons no longer do anything, like when I click them, right? Like there's nothing being clicked, nothing being clicked. So there's a pretty consistent set of steps to take when your UI doesn't work. So to debug your UI, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you have an event system. You must have an event system for it to work. That's step one. The second step, make sure that your button actually has like something going up the chain here. At least something has a graphic raycaster component. This one right here. Make sure that this is here. That's step two. Step three, obviously your button should actually be on. So this tick box should be here. And then step four, if those don't work, what you can do, and this is the pro-life tip that everyone should be aware of, is the best way to get information about why your clicks aren't working is to go to your event system and read this giant panel on the bottom here. This panel tells you everything you could ever want to know about what is happening with your UI. So it tells you at the top, like where your mouse is, how far it's moving and stuff, what it's hovering over, what you last clicked on, like everything going down about your raycast and stuff like this.
And how do we access that panel?
That panel is on your event system object. It's just at the bottom here. So it would look like this by default. If you clicked on your event system, you drag this up to see all of it.
Actually, most people don't even have it like partially dragged up. Most people just have it as a line.
Oh yeah, if it's here like this, you need to drag that up. It's just gonna be docked there. But yeah.
I didn't even know that was a feature.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the same for like a lot of components. They have like hidden.
Yeah.
Secret features.
Secret features, but yeah, this will tell you everything you'd want to know. So if you want to know what am I clicking on when I does this, you can clearly see that it's telling you. You can see that it's telling you that you're. I can't point to this while holding, but it says on your. You see where it says press raycast in bold. underneath it says name text TMP Unity game object. So you can see here that I'm clicking on a block of text. Well, which block of text is that? Well, to make this very clear, let's label this text. So I'm going to call this text. I'm going to call this play. I'm going to call this options. And I'm going to call this quit. Right? So when I name all my text objects different things, I can click on this, and in the event system log, you can see clearly that I'm clicking on options here, the options text, that is. So if you didn't know what your text would look like before, that should prompt you to go to your scene, click on your options text, and see that your text is over the button. And so that should signal to you that you need to scale this down.
Do you rename both the buttons and the text objects?
Yeah, I typically rename both of them when I'm doing this, just because when I'm reading the side, it's easier to it's easier to know what your text is basically. So I might say like text options, for example. It makes your hierarchy easier to read, and it makes your debug log easier to read because the name means something. Yeah. So like actual production, I might do something like that. And then the buttons would be named as well. So yeah, that is like pro tip debugging UI. Good to know that panel is there.
Matt, did you have anything else you wanted to go over?
Yeah, there is. There is one more thing. Cool. So we did that, and we talked about anchoring. We've talked about these panels. One more thing to talk about, and this is a common thing you might do in UI, is in chat. Is that the only thing? Is only for 2D games, the event panel? No, that is for 3D games as well. So if you have your event system in your 3D game, then you'll also see the panel there. The panel will tell you where your mouse is on canvas space. So in your 3D game might look like there's like a bunch of stuff down here and cubes and stuff, but you'll have a canvas that looks like this. So it'll tell you where your mouse is sort of on your canvas space and all of the details about how it's moving and stuff. Cool. So one final thing for, I don't know where mine is then. You might have it, so it's only visible in play mode. So you have to be playing the game, and you have to click on your event system, and it might be like all the way down here. Like you might see the words event system at the bottom in this big bar. You have to drag that up. Not there. That's interesting. I don't know if there's a setting that makes you turn it off or something. Not sure. Mine's always been there, so I haven't ever had that issue.
Try looking at the window tab. It might.
This one?
Yeah. Maybe there's something about it there.
Well, if there is, I wouldn't know. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this topic is a little bit of extra credit, but say I'm going into this button, right? And I don't like the default Unity look. Like I've replaced everything. Like I've got this image, I've got the font and stuff, but I don't like this image. I don't like that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into your UI sprite. I'm gonna click my rounded rectangle because I made this cool rectangle shape that I like so much, and I think it's gonna look really slick and nice. I'm just gonna drag it on the button. It's gonna look right the first try. Oh no, what is that? That's not what it looks like on your screen. If you just did that, that's not what it looks like on your screen. That's because I forgot to undo this. I forgot to undo this. Give me a quick sec. I'll just be redoing this in a sec here. Okay, it should look like that. It should look about like this, like this, maybe. So I can like make this the size I want. If I uncheck the child force expand button, I can actually scale this to size. Wait, control child size. Yeah, so I can scale this down like this. I'm actually gonna grab the options back. So this is not how I want the rounded rectangle to look, right? The rounded rectangle is a sort of a box like this. Yeah, if it pops up, I apologize. It usually does that when you assign an image and it's like crazy with it. You can just uncheck these two boxes and then do some manual scaling and you can fix it. Or you could undo past where you added it in, take your buttons out of the panel or disable the vertical layout group entirely, and then put it back on and stuff. But yeah, it does that when you have images in the attitude. But what I was going to address is that the rectangle doesn't look quite right. You can see it's really stretched in this direction. It's like, that's not how the corner is supposed to look, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do a UI technique called 9 slicing. This is not just a UI technique, but you use this a lot in UI, where you want your sort of corners to be the same size, but everything else to stretch to fit your aspect ratio or whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the rounded rectangle here. Now, it's possible that if you made a 3D project, you don't have this, but you can click the sprite editor button right here. If you're doing a 3D project, you probably don't see this because 3D Unity doesn't automatically come with the 2D sprite package. So if you're doing a project in 3D, what you'll want to do to get the sprite editor to appear is to open your package manager, which is going very slow for me. And find a package called 2D Sprite, which is right here, and install that. I feel I'm generally of the opinion that like you have this for every project. So like when you're doing other projects as well, be sure to add this to your list of packages to automatically add to your project every time. 2D Sprite is just very good. So I'm going to go into my sprite editor here. It's going to bring up this window of the sprite and some boxes and things. So what we want to do to 9 slice this is we want to set sort of the border values, these ones here, such that we section off the corners from the rest of the image, right? So I know so for example, if I'm looking at the corner at the top here, I want this corner to always appear at this shape. And for the middle sections to be able to stretch as stretch or tile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the green buttons to specific points where the corners end, or I can manually type in values. So 100, 100 on all sides should work. Like this. It auto-9 slices to the edge of the corners. That is super neat. I do not know how to get mine to do that. But yeah. Oh, okay. It might have auto 9 sliced it because when I put it in the package, I didn't undo the 9 slicing. That might have been my bad. But if it was already like this, then just know that's the way you set it. So you drag the green bars to the spot where the corners end. So these parts on the inside will all stretch to fit the size, and these corners will all stay the same always. So you can click the apply button here and it will snap like that. So now when I go back to the buttons here, you'll see that if you're following with the package, when you import it, it probably went to sliced immediately. But if you didn't have the 9 slicing, if it was just a rounded rectangle that you just dragged in, it would be in simple like this. So you want to change that to sliced. And that will get it so that it will start stretching those pieces of 9 slicing thing. And you can use the value pixels per unit multiplier to change how small your corners are. So this will give you that nice round rectangle feel. If you snap it to put it to a value like 7, you'll see you have a nice round rectangle with nice square corners. And then you can repeat that process for all of these. You can add the rounded rectangle. You can put a value of 7. You can add a rounded rectangle, and you can put 7. And as long as your image is 9 sliced, it will automatically go to sliced mode here. And so that creates these nice rounded rectangles on your buttons, which look nice in the game. Does anyone have any questions about that process? I know I got the package a little bit wrong there.
Yeah, just in case anybody didn't actually catch it.
Yeah, cool. I'll run through it again. Yeah, cool. So actually what I might do is I'm going to real quick just make a new rounded rectangle. So I'm going to just in sort of file editor, I'm just going to copy this. Oh God, I'm trying to open it. No. Cool. So now I have a fresh rectangle here. So by default, when your rectangle is in here, it'll be all of these values like this. You'll press sprite editor. You'll see there's no bounds on this. So to 9 slice, again, you want to keep the corner. You want to have your corners stay the same size, and everything on the inside that tileable, you want to tile that. So you drag these green bars here in your sprite editor to the spot where those corners end, so that your corners stay at the same size and everything else on the inside stretches. So these sections, like this section, that section, the middle section, will all stretch or tile to the right size. And the ones on the corners will stay at the same size. They'll always be that big.
Is there a way we can change whether it stretches or tiles?
Yes. So in the UI, if you pick sliced mode, it will stretch. And if you pick tiled mode, it will tile. So to show you that real quick, I'm going to click apply on this so that it grabs the 9 slicing like this. Then I'm going to go into my button, right? I'm actually going to make a new one right here so we can show this real quick. So I have a button here. And I'm going to click this and press R like this. I'm actually going to move this out. I'm actually going to change this color. There. And so sliced mode means that it'll stretch, and tiled means that it'll tile. Obviously, with this rounded rectangle, you won't notice the difference. But with other objects like actual art, you'll see the difference, because one of them will stretch the singles texture and one of them will tile it. So for our purposes, slice is enough, and I changed the pixels per unit multiplier to get the corners to a desirable size. So I could, for this particular button, I might move it to 14. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. I just went through that. Yeah.
Pretty much the workshop's over now, but we blocked
Yeah.
it for 2 hours, but usually we try to get most of the content done in 1 or 1.5. So right now it's just
Yeah. Yeah, that is like the very basics, like very foundation of UI, of Unity UI. Unity UI's whole system like goes on for miles. A lot of it is very poorly documented. If you want to do stuff like mess around with positioning in code, or like mess with scroll panels, or do things like those will require a lot more diving. But this should at least allow you to position up the things. Can you finish up the vertical scaling on the game image? Yeah, I can. So let me see if I remember how to actually do that. So I'm gonna disable the buttons real quick. Yeah, no problem, actually. So what we want is for the actual panel size to decrease with the what's it called? The game window here. So there's a few ways we might do that. I'm actually trying to think. Let's see if it was. Alex says, one of my biggest problems is making sure my menu items don't overlap / interact weirdly when aspect ratio changes. Is there a way to keep them out of each other's space? Yeah, there is. So there's a couple like really there's a couple really queer ways to do it. A couple like really like there's some ways that are like really hard, but like generally if you organize your content into panels, they should stay in the same space. So for example, you might like we had an issue here where the buttons sort of overlap with the game like this. If you do that, that wouldn't happen if I had sectioned this off well into a panel. So I would take this panel. Right now it's anchored to the middle, but what I could do is I could say grab a panel like this. Just gonna remove this here, and I'm actually gonna take this panel so that it's like this big, like here. Right. So if I want these to not collide, what I might do is say this panel is the top panel, and then this panel is the bottom panel. And so I can take this and have it be sort of a scale like this. So that it's the same distance down here. And then I might have this side be also scaled like that, but at the same distance here. And I think that should make it so that no matter how big this is, the panels don't actually collide with each other. Let me see. Yeah, the panels are super weird to mess with. It's finagly. Generally though, if you don't want these to collide with each other, you might like I've done a bunch of different arrangements for this. Not all of them are perfect. But some generally good, but as long as you're generally like pretty well constructed with your anchors and anchor choices, and you keep things organized inside panels, things won't collide with each other that often. One other thing to note that will make your whole life way easier is going to canvas and changing screen space overlay to, not that one, sorry, constant pixel size here to scale with screen size like this. That makes it so that at the same aspect resolution, things will appear the same size, like no matter how big or small the window is. So like, I don't know why my game is doing that. I don't know why my game is doing that. Might have messed this up a little bit. So like if I was to change the aspect ratio of this, then you see the word game is the same relative size to the whole window as it is if I had it much bigger like this. Dane says, what do you have the aspect ratio fitter set to? Currently my anchors are right, but the game image doesn't scale. So with your aspect ratio fitter, you want, for this one, I have fit in parent right here. That'll make it so that the sort of the panel on the outside, it'll sort of fit to that spot. You can also use envelop parent, which does that. Obviously, it tries to fill the entire space of that. Santiago asks, how do you handle submenus like options or credits, etc.? So there's a few ways to do it. One way is to just disable one menu entirely. So if I have all of these in the panel here, I can just disable them like this and then enable another menu. That's a little crude. It's a little immediate. So like if I had an options menu over here, if I had an options menu here, it would just like snap directly to it. That's really crude. That's it's really instant and doesn't have much feedback to it. So other thing you might do is you might just have the two panels and you might animate between them. So you might have this one fade out and then another one fade in. A good way to do fade out and fade in is to use a component called a canvas, or the canvas group, and to take the alpha value down like this. So that automatically takes all of the content inside the canvas group and fades it out. So you might, when you click options, you might handle a fade out from 1 to 0 like this. And then you go to your options menu, enable it, and then do a 0 to 1 on the options.
Wait, even if it's alpha 0, wouldn't they still be interactable?
Yeah, so it would still be interactable even if the alpha is 0. So what you'd have to do is uncheck these boxes as well. But you'd also handle that if you disabled this after the fade out was over. Do I use do tween, lean tween, or something else for UI animations? Yeah, I typically use do tween. It's a lot easier than writing coroutines. I'm planning to do a workshop on do tween coming up. So. Yeah. On submenus, one thing I did for GemSetter was on GemSetter, instead of having the canvas and an overlay space, which is right here, overlay space is basically just 0, 0 is the bottom left, is 0, 0 is your screen, and then your screen goes all the way up to its opposite corner, and it's just the number there up the top. That's a bad explanation, but it treats your screen coordinates as like the actual physical coordinate of the where the object is. If I was to take, say, screen space camera instead, and then drag this camera in here, you'll see the entire canvas now goes neatly into the camera. And you can't see it for some reason. I think it's because the BG is above it. Is that the reason? Yeah, it's because the BG is above it. I'm gonna move it up, cool. So it goes into the camera like this. So now if I take the camera and I move it around, it stays where the camera is. But what I did for GemSetter was I made this into screen space. I made this into world space. World space means that your canvas, world space is a crazy hack where your canvas will like literally be a physical object that you can move around like this. So I could say, I could get this canvas to be positioned over here and it would be just fine. It would appear like that. Or I could put the canvas over there and it'd be like that. I could put the canvas over there. This is typically used for diegetic UI, which is UI that's like embedded in your scene. It looks like it's part of the world. You don't want to use world space typically for full screen, like large UI. But how I used this in GemSetter was I had the options menu directly next to it like this, and then I just moved the camera from one position to the other position.
It's really good for tutorial graphics too.
Yeah, because often you'll want your tutorial text to like point to something in particular in the screen. So positioning a canvas in world space is a great way to do that. It's just not good for full screen things. Like if you want something to definitely be at the top corner of your camera or something to definitely be at the bottom corner of your camera, then you'll want to use camera space or overlay space. It's a lot easier to position things relative to your camera's boundaries that way. But if it's like dependent on a position in the world, you can use world space and it's really good.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
In my previous like game jams that I participated in, I would usually work with my game view set to a certain aspect ratio, like
Yeah.
1920 by 1080. Is
yeah.
that a bad practice? Because you see,
Not a bad practice.
Okay.
You might want to like see your game, how your game looks at a specific aspect ratio, because that's the resolution you expect people that will be playing in. It's just worth noting that when you're trying to mess around with your UI and see if it works well in all aspect ratios, free aspect is the best way to do it because you can physically change the boundaries of your screen.
Okay.
Typically, if you're testing your game, though, you do want it to be in a certain aspect ratio because you want to see what your player will see.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, if you intend to just like lock the aspect ratio to a certain setting, there are ways of doing that.
Yeah, I have not figured out a good way of doing that. Like,
yeah,
it's very finicky.
Okay.
For GemSitter, you'll notice that I took a giant like hack and just included a basic menu at the beginning that says, hey, you should be playing in a 16:9. Please kill your window boundaries to the right size. That's the opening screen for GemSitter. So that's what I did because I have no way to enforce it.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember other UI hacks that I typically use. One very confusing thing in UI is masks. That's a cool thing you might use a lot. Event trigger is also really useful for code-based events. That's a thing. Yeah. Unity has like a ton of options for like making full-on forms. Like we've got all these things here. You've got your drop downs, you've got your input fields, your sliders. When do you decide to use multiple canvases? I have heard that using more than one canvas is like a good practice, and like you should even like put canvases inside canvases. I don't know the full details about that. I typically, so in GemSitter, for example, in the editor, I have different canvases for like the editor sidebar, the sort of menu on the other side of the thing, a canvas for the buttons that you click to increase or decrease the size of the playfield. I think there's one for level buttons, so like the undo, restart buttons. There's several. Rodrigo asked, do you need an event system for every canvas? You do not. In fact, throughout your entire game, you need one event system ever. So one thing I often do is I prefab this object. So I drag this into here to make a prefab of it. And then I assign this a script. I'm not going to write the script, but I assign this a script called event system singleton. And then I make that script. I write that script such that duplicate event system objects will destroy themselves. That's to make it so you always have one event system all the time. Yeah, there it is. Script. Cool. and the writing a singleton script is a talk for another time. There's a good deal to talk about doing how to do game managers correctly, or not poorly, not correct. There's no correct way to do a game manager, but there are some ways that aren't ideal because you run into some design problems. Should you make a background image be part of the canvas? Yeah, that's a great question. In this case, in the case I have it right now, I don't have it as a back in the canvas, but it typically just depends whether you want your background image to be like tied to your screen size. So for what I have right now, right? What I have right now is this because this background is here in the world, it's tied to where it's tied to the camera's position. So if I was to take the camera and move it around, it would show different parts of the background image. And it's showing different parts of the canvas as well because I have it in world space. But if I move my canvas around, you can see it shows a different part of the background like this. It would not do that if I put it in UI. So if there was a big panel on the outside, UI panel, there was a big panel on the outside here, and I had this be the BG image like that. I'm just gonna put that here, right? Then that BG image will, that background image will follow the camera precisely, so it won't change like that. You can see, for some reason it has opacity. Let me get rid of that. But yeah, so you can see that if I move the camera position like this, the actual background doesn't move at all. So one reason, so you do that if that's what you want. You want your background to be tied to this like that. You want your camera to be tied to the anchored positions and stuff. You might do the in-world one if you want your camera to say be able to slowly scroll across it in the background, for example. UI, use the same canvas when possible, only create multiple canvases when canvas properties change. Create a panel per screen, use panels as containers to group parts that compose an element. Yeah, that's probably generally a good idea. I have heard that using multiple canvases can be a good idea because it's like more efficient when you change one object in one of the canvases. You don't have to redraw everything in the entire canvas or whatever. I don't know the details about optimizing that. You have to look that one up. Panels can also serve as a helper for elements to be anchored together. Yeah. You generally want to group your things into panels. Panels are useful. Group your things properly and you will have no UI issues for the most part. See you, Rodrigo. Thanks for coming.
Nothing else. Well, thank you.
Cool, yeah.
Thank you, Matt, for a great workshop.
First workshop I've ever done. God.
Nah, dude, it was great. It was definitely good.
Great job.
Hopefully-
I expected nothing less.
Thank you, Noah. Yeah, hopefully you all learned something about UI today. There are many things about it that are weird, and it's good to get a good start on it.
So again, this is being recorded. It'll be put up on our YouTube channel in case you missed anything and want to go back to it. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. See you guys at the next workshop.
See you.
Next time on EGaDS workshops.
There's so many guys' workshops.